Welcome to the Building Doctor Show with Jens Johansson.
All right, it is 3:30 and time for the Building Doctor Show. My name is Jim Kessler. Glad to see you all here today. The Building Doctor, Jens Johansson, he's not available today, so you've got us as the stand-ins and the fill-ins to educate everybody a little bit today. If you're joining us on the podcast today, thanks for listening. If you'd like to reach out to the show for full experience, visit our website, j2consultants.com, to register for the Building Doctor Show, where you can attend a live via Zoom or submit your questions, and we will go through and answer all that. We're also happy to announce that the Building Doctor Show is now live on YouTube as well. So you can also put your questions in the comments in the chat here, and we will get to them at the end of the show. Today, we are talking about construction best practices and the J2 standard of care. So there's a lot to cover in that, and for that today, we've got a special guest, Mr. Neil Schiffman. Neil is a community association manager with FCS Management in Utah, and he is also the director of client support for the company. So he has a lot of people that he is working with there. So welcome to the show, Neil.
Super excited to be here. This is a fun topic that is on a lot of our minds recently with various things going on.
So a little bit more about Neil, because it's written in here, and we want to share all the good things about Neil and the work that he does. He excels at fostering strong relationships with homeowners associations and condominium boards, and ensures seamless operations and vibrant community living. So that's a comprehensive knowledge of property and association management. You've been doing this for a long time, so this is going to be right down both of our areas of expertise when we're talking about best practices as it relates to repair projects, maintenance projects, construction projects, all that fun stuff. And of course, you guys are all going to have a chance to ask questions of Neil and myself at the end of the show, and you can put your questions into the little chat, and it's going to be monitored by the team, and they will put all that stuff together. Neil, are you ready?
So ready. This is going to be a fun time. I'm excited.
And here we go. So our big conversations today are how to avoid headaches, and headaches are terrible for all of us. So we want to talk about the best practices just as an industry. You know, we talk about the what, the how, the who, and the when. And then a little bit about how J2 takes that and kind of changes it a little bit, because we know association managers have a lot of headaches. We know boards have a lot of headaches, and we're dealing with whether it's a high rise, a mid rise, a single family, or a community of multiple buildings. It's really important to be able to understand, you know, some of the basic principles so we can avoid problems at the end. When we talk about the standard of care, it's a little bit about the J2 way, so you can get a little bit of J2isms in here and how we've kind of defined our expertise to make sure that we are helping our managers, we're helping our clients, we're helping our boards, because headaches are a bad thing.
Yeah, on the side of the world of managing all of these communities, we've got enough headaches going on. Nothing worse than something going wrong and causing a headache during a big repair project. Those are always a big time bummer.
And for somebody like you, Neil, in your position, you know, you've got, let's say you have 8 communities and there's 100 owners in each one of those. That's 800 doors. That's a lot of things to try and manage and balance. And so having a playbook is beneficial.
Yeah. I would say more than beneficial, it's required at this point, right? You're getting into these projects, you're spending all of these owners' money to try to take care of their buildings, whatever that may look like, and not having that playbook or recipe book to kind of guide you through that process. Boy, oh boy, does that just turn into some unfortunate circumstances or headaches, as we may call them.
Okay, so we're going to focus on you to start with, Neil. We're going to talk about some of these things that are headaches, and then we're going to talk about how we can deal with them. So some things that give association managers headaches. We're ready to start the repairs, but the bank said we need to hire a project manager to oversee the repairs. Or we've done an assessment for the building and already collected the money, but we didn't plan for the unforeseen damages. And one of my favorites, the contractor has provided a change order from their original scope of work to have the repairs meet code. Have you heard these before?
Jim, I think that I've heard all of these multiple times on various projects. And it's just a bummer every time that these come up. You're prepared, you're ready, you think it's good to go, and you have to get a loan. And during that loan process, they say, okay, well, who's going to oversee the project? Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. All right. Back to square one, essentially. Hey, we've collected a whole bunch of money. We're ready to start the repairs. And we weren't really sure what the nature of the repair was going to look like. You know, you're going to repair a roof, you're going to repair some decks, pretty common issues that come up through the age of a building, and there's dry rot somewhere. Now what? Ah, darn. And then also my favorite, I think you and I were sitting at the same table when we're talking to a contractor, like, wait, I have to do this to code? Shoot. I sure wish that I would have specified that before getting you involved in that project. But live and learn, right? That's the purpose of our webinar and conversation today, is to hopefully learn from some of our past mistakes.
Yeah, and what we're going to do is kind of outline a little bit of a plan. Here are some steps that we can take to avoid some headaches. But ultimately, these headaches, they lead to prices going up. There's delays in starting, there's delays in funding, contractors quit. You have to go back to the association or go back to your client and say, maybe we should have had a really good plan. We didn't have it. We're going to need more money now. You and I both know we've done this enough times that there is nothing worse than going in and having a poor plan and to go back to your client and say, we're going to have to find a way to get more money.
Money doesn't solve everything, but in the world of community management and building repairs, money solves a whole lot of problems. And there's very few things worse than making an estimate of a project, thinking that it's going to cost, oh, this one's going to be $100,000 project, and it turns into a $120,000 project because you just weren't quite understanding of what that entire scope was going to look like.
So to cover those things, what we're going to look at is the what, the how, the who, and the when. So, you know, the what on the beginning side and inspections and reserve studies, because that can drive a lot of these projects, whether it's repair or maintenance. The how, the RFP process, so that's a request for proposal and what that looks like. The bids are not apples to apples. Who do we invite, and you know, what are they looking at, and when? You know, what is in the contracts? When is the right time to sign a contract, and when do we actually get this started? So, without further ado, best practices, keeping it simple, right? The KISS principle here. The difference between an inspection and a reserve study. So the reserve study gives you a quantitative analysis of your property. How old is the siding? How old are the roofs? How old are the windows, lights, all the building components, from paint, sealant, all those. It's quantitative. How many square feet and the expected useful life, as opposed to a qualitative analysis from an inspection standpoint. How is it performing? And that's what we do on that front end. We inspect to determine what needs to be done, as opposed to, and I'm sure you've heard this, Neil, our roofs are, you know, only 10 years old, but we had an inspection and we got to replace our roofs, and they were expected to be a 20-year roof. So that's that performance piece. Reserve studies are amazing to start that funding process and start setting the money aside for that work, but really it's that performance piece.
Yeah, in my world, my day-to-day, I'm looking at a reserve study constantly as a budgeting tool and a conversation starter, right? Here is how long this piece of your community is supposed to last. No real conversation of what the maintenance is supposed to look like and what to do if something fails. And so the quantitative analysis is great for, we need to set aside $10 for this and 2 pennies for this and $8 for that. but it doesn't give us the real picture of how are things looking, what is the actual remaining useful life, and what do I do with it now? And that's where that qualitative analysis really comes into play for taking care of those common elements, buildings, decks, railings, all of these things that make up a home where our residents are living.
Yeah, and one other distinction between the two is the HUD and Housing Authority, they give you an expected useful life. But your market that you're sitting in today has a different reaction to, I don't know, the sun, and how the sun will beat up on roofs or the sun will beat up on paint as opposed to some other places in the United States. So the qualitative is a good little performance piece to say, how is it doing? What do we need to work on? So once we've identified what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. So this is that RFP process, request for proposal. And there is a lot of different ways to get there. You can have a written narrative scope of work summary, but it's kind of like a recipe. It's just a short recipe, but we've all gone on and we've looked at recipes for something that we want to make, and you get like 20 pages of recipe, and you're like, oh man, that could be a lot of recipe. Our how oftentimes starts, and we'll get into a little bit of the J2, but the how often is a narrative that turns into drawings and details and specifications. So we've got an actual playbook, we've got materials, we've got sequencing, but it can be doled down a little bit. So you at least have something you can give to a contractor.
Yeah, so I'm new in the industry many years ago, and I sign up with a contractor to do some gutter cleaning, and come to find out they didn't really tell me, oh, by the way, the rental of our lift is not included in this price. So dirty little secret in the world of community management. Many times we will go out to a contractor and say, hey, can you tell us what you think this is going to cost, what this would look like? And they give us their proposal. And from that proposal, I cheat and I take that information and turn that into my request for proposal, my RFP, that I'm going to send to 2 or 3 other contractors. Now, look, I get it. That works when your project is a couple $1,000s. The likelihood of this breaking the bank or turning into a completely sour experience, probably more limited. Now, as you get into the hundreds and sometimes millions of dollar projects that you and I have worked on, that is a completely unacceptable process. Somebody needs to put that RFP together that understands how the building works, right? This is where this integrates with this part, and this, all of that kind of stuff needs to be spelled out in that RFP process. Otherwise, good luck with that thing actually working out.
Thank you for the dirty little secret. We'll all keep that in mind. So that's the how, the RFP process. And one of the things that drives, I know, managers crazy as well as consultants like us is, man, our bids are not apples to apples. And we're getting people that are bidding on different systems and different methodologies. And your example you just used, you've got somebody come out to clean the gutter, but they didn't include any lift or access to get there to actually clean the gutter. So if you really want to be able to get apples to apples, you need to have a pretty clearly defined RFP, maybe not how many hammers you need to bring to the property to do the work, but it's got to be pretty dialed in. So you can have 2 people or 2 contractors bidding the same as opposed to different, because that's when you get apples and oranges, or our favorite apples and bananas, because they're clearly not apples to apples.
Yeah, boards love to say, oh, I want an apples to apples comparison, but without being really, really clear on what that expectation is, it's really hard. And so what we're talking about ultimately is the difference between a 3 or 4 page RFP and sometimes a hundreds of pages long RFP. What you can tell pretty easily by the size of what you're asking for, the quality of the bid that you're going to get in return. Missing out on that, again, you're setting yourself up for a headache.
Yeah, and these are just really simple best practices to try and make sure that we're going through, whether I would say smaller repair and maintenance type projects, you know, identifying what needs to be done, how the work is gonna get done, you know, the who, taking it to the contractors that probably have that specialty, and no offense to my roofer friends, but I probably am not gonna have them do a bunch of window installations. They are specialized trade. We really want those people to focus in on that. So I'm going through this process. I've got steps 1, 2, and 3 done. Now I'm gonna be looking at the when, the timing of the work. We're avoiding all of the other in-between pieces, which we'll get into here shortly. But we received a bid from a contractor. They've got their contract associated with it. They say, let's sign this and let's get going. Most of those contractor agreements are a little bit more geared towards the contractor favoritism than they are the client favoritism. So having a legal person, an attorney, a lawyer that represents your client would be really good to take a look at that. And I know when we go through the process, we certainly recommend legal review because it's a legally binding document. And being an agreement, the two parties agreeing on something, you have the contractor and the client, they are agreeing to do work this way. And the other little piece to look at is the contractor properly licensed and experienced to perform the work. So what if they're not a general contractor to do that?
Well, and how many roofers or window guys or siding guys have a general contractor's license? Oh, I can totally do all of it. And you're like, well, I understand that maybe legally you can perform all of this work, but again, are you going to be able to put it together so that it doesn't fail in another couple of years? Right? That contractor process and looking at those contracts is so important. Now, couple $1,000s, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. The level of care of what you're looking at in those contracts, of course, are going to be different. And going with a contractor provided contract on a $5,000 little deal, great. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's going to work out okay for you. But when we're talking an entire strip and reclad, for example, that's going to be a couple $100,000 for that building, maybe even $1 million for that building. That contract being written in the contractor's benefit.
Headache. So we're avoiding headaches. We have 4 simple steps for best practices, repair and maintenance, whether you're an association manager, you're a contractor, you're a board member. Unfortunately, I am the board president for my association. I go through these things when we're looking at doing work. What are we going to do? How are we going to get it done? Who are we going to talk to? And then when are we going to start? So 4 simple tricks. Okay. So after 17 years of J2 going through best practices, now let's look at, you know, a J2 standard of care. And Neil, you and I will be able to talk a little bit more about the J2 standard of care because it's developed a lot over the years and you've seen some differences and changes between not only our way, but other people's way. So feel free to weigh in on some of this.
Oh yeah, this is where our conversation really gets fun, where we separate the disasters from the enjoyable experiences during the repair process, because it can be a good time, right? There are good things that come out of a large repair project, but it really requires a little bit of that Stephen Covey of beginning with the end in mind and understanding what direction are we going. Because if you come at that from the middle and try to work through both ends.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to, and we got to slide in here. We don't want to jump in here or there. We want to actually go through this process because oftentimes you have to start over or it's going to cost more money to try and catch up or to correct some issues. And really, time is money and it's not ours to spend. And we want to be diligent about other people's money. So the way we like to start most projects is to identify the issues. And that could be going through and doing a visual inspection, doing the invasive inspection, identifying and documenting how is it performing. And then when we put this together, got to have some sort of parameters. Is this something that is an immediate item, like life safety? Your roof is going to fall off, or your windows are going to fall out, or your rails are going to fall off, something that will impact somebody's life. This is an immediate life safety item. A short-term item is damage. So we've all seen damaged trim, we've seen damaged siding, we've seen damaged materials. What is it affecting? You know, is that actually allowing water to get in and affect the building, or is it exhausting a lot of air from the inside and it's causing some other sort of damage? And then the long term, which is the performance considerations. Those three are key to helping identify what you need to do next. If it's a long-term performance thing, great, we have time to plan for it. But if it is immediate life safety, we probably need to get a plan together today so we can get this fixed tomorrow, because we don't want to have anything in peril.
Yeah, and this does happen, right? All three of these types of issues are going to happen during the life of a community, potentially during homeownership for you personally, right? If, oh my goodness, the roof leak turned into a collapsed roof, or the deck is potentially coming away from the home. I can't be getting out on that deck right now. Those type of issues, of course, are going to require a little bit of an expedited process of, hey, we've got to get this going right now. But those inspections still are really required to, again, understand what am I getting myself into? Getting a quality person out there to perform those inspections. Hey, guess what? We are trying to do a window repair and we tear off around the window, and goodness gracious, there's some massive beam that's in the middle of this house that's sagging and it looks a little iffy. Hey, Jim, I thought this was a window repair and it was going to cost me $10,000, but that doesn't seem like what this is going to turn into, right? That type of an inspection, sometimes in the middle of kind of a routine deal that comes up all the time, turned into a much bigger deal.
Yeah, and one of the, shameless plug for J2 here real quick. Some of our tenets and core values transition not only between what we do and how we do it, but how we're communicating that. So communicating to clarity, you see it right here, meeting with the client. So we've done this inspection, we've written this report in engineer ease or architectural ease, or it's written in a language that can be sometimes tough to understand when you're talking about a defect or a system or a manufacturer's requirement. So meeting with the client, meeting with the manager and saying, okay, here's what we saw, here's what that impact is, and this is what it looks like. This sets a precedence going through the J2 standard of care, progressing through and having involvement in understanding. And I know you and I have been in a number of meetings where, hey, you inspected my building 5 years ago, and I need you to inspect the building again, but I want to hear that it's gotten better. It's not often the case.
Yeah, usually, I'm not saying it can't happen, but I've never experienced an inspection issue, because let's be honest, we are we're interested in not finding problems sometimes, and we put off that inspection process. We're just going to rely on our quantitative analysis, our reserve study, to kind of guide what we're taking care of. So, all right, fine, it's finally bad enough. We're going to call somebody out and we're going to have them inspect it. And they come back with a little bit of a diagnosis of what that's supposed to look like. And we say, well, we're not really ready to pull the trigger right now, so we're just going to hang out and wait. 5 years down the road, they call us up again and they say, so about that problem that we reported a couple years ago, where are we at on that? Did it stop leaking? Then the problem probably hasn't gotten better, right?
And the unfortunate byproduct of that is the scope is probably increased, where we might have had something smaller to fix. Now we have something larger because of time. So again, a headache.
Yeah. If we're going to take anything from what I have to advise, it is a painful process to have to go through a large repair project. The funds aren't available for whatever reason. The repair is due ahead of schedule. Putting it off and waiting. Here's what we see in the world of HOAs. Owners are upset. Owners are frustrated. Hey, I bought a home and I want this home to look nice, and surprise, surprise, it doesn't. Or I have to deal with regular recurring maintenance issues. The association is, we're rudderless. We're not sure where we're going. Making a plan and getting those repairs scheduled and moving along as soon as possible will be your best bet. Costs are going to be less. Jim, you and I have been involved with a project that started almost more than a decade ago, and they sat on it, right? They waited and they waited and they waited, and were baffled when 10 years down the line, the original cost was no longer valid. I can't even imagine what some of those projects would look like had they not taken care of them before some of the inflation that we've been dealing with over the last couple of years really kicked in. So waiting is just, that's a recipe for a long-term disaster headache, maybe even a migraine.
Maybe a migraine. So we've started the process with identifying the issues, and the two hardest parts of all this are understanding and allowing acceptance that there are issues, and then down the road, the financial struggles. Those are real. We're going to talk about them.
Yep.
So next step, defining the scope of work. So the recipe for the repair plan. And this is where we want to ensure that we're getting apples to apples. We involve the client during this process because, to your point, we're doing a large scale repair project. We have to remove siding, we have to remove windows, roofing, whatever the case may be. At that point in time, we're going to be looking for a little bit of a performance upgrade, but with that, maybe the 1979 build, we can change the way it looks. I'm not going to change the structure. I'm not going to go overboard and do some sort of capital repair project. But what we're doing is we're going to make it look nice. We're going to make it look like a modern building, something that was built within the last couple of years. The scope of work. So the J2 scope of work can be a narrative scope of what we're talking about in the larger scale projects, for anywhere from 10 to 30 pages of drawings, details, waterproof sequencing, structural notes, and then 200 to 300 pages of specifications. We really want to dive into, here's what we want, here's how we want it done, because we want to take this to contractors, because you often have to go to a multiple bidding situation. So how do we ensure that we're as close to apples as possible? You've got to really have a lot of information in them.
Yeah, this is personally my favorite part of the process, because the inspection and identification of issues very often follows some stages of grief where there's some denial and anger and blaming and all of these kind of things. And okay, fine, we're ready to kind of tackle this project. And during this phase, this is where it gets really fun, because the owners and board members get to envision, they get to see some light at the end of the tunnel of, oh my goodness, my building could look like that. That's my favorite phrase. Oh my goodness, my building could look like that. Because many times their buildings, because of deferred maintenance or whatever, have not looked like an attractive place to call home for so long. And they can finally say, oh my goodness, this could be great. Now, there's still lots and lots to go, but seeing that light at the end of the tunnel in some of these owners' eyes is really, really rewarding.
Yeah, and often with this scope of work, let's again use the example of a large scale project. We're going to start with the end goal in mind. Let's not talk about colors, but we can talk a little bit about it, but texture and assemblies and systems. And then from there, we're going to build this recipe. This is what you want it to look like. And then we're going to build that recipe. We're going to have a whole bunch of meetings, and we're going to talk about this recipe development. And there is a byproduct of beautification. There's also a byproduct of increasing performance, so you don't have to go through this again.
Yep.
Build in a little bit of redundancy to protect that greatest asset that most people have. One of my favorite parts in what we do and how we do it is doing the contractor interviews, because we know the contractors, because we're working with contractors all the time. And in the majority of the markets we work with, there's a pretty defined number of contractors you can work with that do this work. We call it occupied remediation. They're vetted, they have insurance to work on condominiums, they know how to deal with homeowners, they know how to deal with, a grandparent or a mother who has a cat at home or needs to work around a certain schedule because it's not an active construction site. we create the contractor interview questions. I'm gonna send it off to Neil and his team. I'm gonna send it off to his client, his board. Within that, there's a body of questions and we kind of we guide the process. You know, the contractor is the hero, the consultant in this case, we're just there to guide. And at the end of it, a number of years ago, I created a little ranking game. Because how else do you walk out of an interview and decide who you're gonna hire? Because there's the price of the work, they've all bid on the same thing. They did a presentation, they bring their leadership, and then what does your gut tell you? And I know, Neil, you and I have had numerous experiences in the interview phase where we had a vision that it was gonna go a particular way and it went 180.
Yeah. Well, because it's absolutely true. There are very few contractors in the world of multifamily housing who are willing to deal with occupied remediation. Everybody loves new construction. That's super fun. Occupied remediation and dealing with the escaping cat and the work from home situation and all of the things that come with that gets complicated. And so we have great relationships with all kinds of different contractors who do this work. And so many times we go into that contractor interview like, yeah, they're probably going to go with contractor A. And these interviews are incredible because you get to ask the real questions of that vendor. Okay, what are we going to do about parking? We've got a really unique parking situation. We've got some city maintained streets. We've got some private streets. We've got to deal with trash and waste removal. We've got to deal with, there's a school bus that goes through our neighborhood. You're going to be out of the way at 7 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon so that this big bus can get through this community. Those types of questions come up during this contractor interviews, and it gives the contractor an opportunity to shine and show some of how they have dealt with similar projects in a creative way. So contractor interviews are a blast. And to the story of they picked somebody else completely, it wasn't about cost. This association, like all associations, did not want to spend more than they needed to. But because that contractor came prepared to deal with their unique situation and their weirdness, for lack of a better term, their weirdness of what they wanted and what their expectations were, because this is their baby, they went with a different contractor that was completely unexpected. And that's great for them. They got exactly what they wanted. And now, a couple years later that it's done, they couldn't be happier.
Right. And this is a very important part of the process for involvement.
Yep.
You know, keeping people engaged and keeping people very involved. As many of these projects as we do, at the end of the day, it's not your dollars and cents or my dollars and cents to go fix this. There is somebody else that we have to be responsible to. So, you know, when a contractor says, man, Jim just doesn't give me any work. It's not my job to give you work. It's my job to put a recipe out there and prepare you for this. It's your job to go get it. And that example was perfect because I remember being a little shocked.
Yeah.
In a good way, you know, that they were not just looking at dollars and cents. They were looking at the entire package and what was presented and how much thought had gone into it. And here's how we're going to address all of these 42 different bullet points between garbage and school buses and everything else. We've thought it through, and this is what we're going to do. And it really weighs on a decision.
And the other incredible thing is these contractors, they can't not be honest during sometimes a 90-minute interview. And occasionally they want to argue with the recipe. And you're like, no, I did step one. I've identified what my issues are. I've gone through all my stages of grief and I've accepted it's go time. I've defined my scope of work. I know what I want. Because if you don't know what you want, that contractor can come in and sell you whatever they like, right? But because we've gone through those first 2 steps of this process, when that contractor says, oh, I think that we can deal with this in this way or that way, the board understands the questions and clarifications to ask to make sure that we're all on the same page so that they're getting what they need.
So we've done the contractor interviews. We've likely made some selections or narrowed it down. We took it from 5 to 3 or 3 to 1. We're down there. We're starting to talk about contracts and contract language. So we utilize the AIA suite of documents. And it's because it is really mutually accepted between contractors and attorneys because it's mutually beneficial. But it defines the scope and it protects all the parties that are involved. There are indemnifications for everybody that's involved in a project. There's protection clauses, the right to terminate a contractor or the right for the contractor to terminate the client. You know, you've got to make sure that there's a good exchange and a good balance between those things because it's an agreement. So we're going back to that agreement. A contract is an agreement. We are agreeing to do this work for said price, and the client is agreeing to pay for said work at said price. Important step, legal representation needs to be involved because this is a legally binding document.
Right. This is where the attorney's value really comes into play to make sure that, okay, we are ready to start paying this contractor for work. Have we crossed all of our T's? Have we dotted all of our I's? So you don't get caught holding a bag of, oh my goodness, I have to pay for a lift that I wasn't expecting. That's a headache that going through this process correctly and following these standard of care steps really can protect that association so that you know what's going to happen. This is where, hey, what happens if you damage that 100-year-old tree comes into play, right? All of those contract provisions need to be considered at this step for this to be successful. And I can't tell you how many times this process has, again, enlightened something with that contractor of what they are or are not prepared to provide during this. Porta potties. Nobody wants to talk about that part, but now what, right? Who's going to deal with that?
Kind of need them.
Yeah, something that if you're not prepared, if you don't have somebody in your corner to guide you through this process, oh no, now what? I didn't specify where I wanted that porta potty to go. Now I'm stuck with it in a place that maybe isn't my favorite.
And I know that there's, you know, possibly people all over the country that are listening to this. Each different municipality, different state has different nuances.
Yep.
So this is why you really need to have, you need to pay an attorney to take a look at the contract, well versed in the contract language, so they can make sure that all the provisions are in there. And I remember first time working out of state, writing up a contract, and I included things that weren't allowed. So I had to get educated, and I was educated by the attorney. So I thank them for educating.
Jim, we're talking about millions of dollars, and you're not going to pay a couple thousand for an attorney to make sure that you're going to get what you asked for.
And even at the $10,000 range, you still want to be protected because insurance provisions are contained within there. You want to make sure you have necessary insurance and coverage. It could be if you were talking about the $10,000 window repair that grew into a beam or, you know, framing replacement. Provisions are identified in the contract and how you move forward.
Yep.
So it's protection.
Well, and the other fun part that, again, we sometimes forget are those progress payments. You and I get really nervous when a vendor wants a 50% down payment. That's going to cause a headache. That's not something that you or I are ever going to advise our client to allow as part of their contract. But if you don't have the right type of advice, hey, you may end up getting a headache because you didn't think of those kind of things. So yeah, lots and lots of fun in this part.
Yeah, those down payments, you know, on a $2,000 project, maybe it's okay, but on a $1 million project, putting that kind of a down payment, I have a tough time ordering things online and paying for it and waiting for it to be shipped to my house because I want it right now if I'm paying for it. So that's where the contract language and those provisions are really important.
Well, I have been involved with this, never to the scope of millions of dollars, but you know, we made a down payment to get some stairs repaired. Those awesome stair treads in the state of Utah don't do very well. And we made the down payment and the contractor disappeared. Board didn't want to pay for some oversight, didn't want to pay for a project manager to deal with this. Oh, we'll just take care of it. And that contractor disappeared and they were out $10,000. That's a headache that can be avoided when you're being careful and getting proper review of a contract.
Speaking of dollars, the biggest headache of them all.
Yes.
The financial planning for the repairs and how you're gonna pay for the work. Different states have different rules and different allowances for coverages here and there. Ultimately, it comes down to the client, the association is gonna be paying for the work. And there's self-assessment, there's loan assessments, there's financial planning over a period of time to build up enough money to do this type of work. It really depends on the scope and where you're located, but this is probably one of the harder pieces. We've gone through and we've identified the issues, we've defined the scope. We've done the interviews and got the contract language where we want. Now, how are we gonna pay for it? Sometimes this falls in a little earlier, you know, we have to start having those conversations. We really don't know the price of work until we have the recipe and they bid it, so you kind of intermix this in a couple of different places. Certainly the hardest part is trying to come up with that financial plan.
Yeah. Now, the conversations about the funds and where you're going to get the funds, those are brought up almost immediately when you're identifying the work and it's doing those inspections. But a bank will not loan money, surprise, surprise, unless they know what's going to get done, unless they know that the contractor who is going to get it taken care of has the ability and licenses to get it taken care of, and understands that the association is prepared to pay that loan back. So this one's tough. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This one is absolutely tough, but there's lots and lots of people in your corner that are here to help you. Reach out to whatever bank. You got a 4-unit association and you're using the local credit union. Go talk to them. You're a 1,000-unit community and you've got a big bank. Great. Go reach out to your banking representative and start this conversation to look at what this is going to look like. Now, there are worlds where it is. We've saved up, we're ready to go, and those are super fun when the repairs come due, when it's time to do them, and they're just simple and great. But there's still some planning that needs to be done when you're going to make a reserve expense of hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars. So no matter how you slice it of where this money is coming from, how to pay for it is a conversation that's going to come up. And having somebody to guide you through that is really, really important.
Yeah, and what we don't want to do is get too far down the road without having a financial plan or a financial discussion. We also don't want to have the financial discussion drive the scope of repair, because we're identifying the things that need to be done. We can go through value engineering, and that's a subset to all of these different scopes of work. And you can look at ways to try and take a little bit off here and there, and what is our risk. But you've identified the issues that need corrective action. What is it going to take to get there? And if it takes time, let's put time on our side, as long as we're not in that immediate life safety category. So another little piece that we like to do at J2 is the contract administration. And every state is a little bit different as far as if there is a requirement or a desire, or if there is a bank involved. So this is administering the contract. So the contract defines the scope of work and how it's going to be done. And with contract administration, you have somebody who is overseeing the work, documenting the repair process, making sure that the contractor is following that recipe, and answering any questions along the way. Using your example again, you open up around a window and it grows into a beam damage. What are we going to do? Who's going to drive that bus? And who's going to make sure that we've got not only a good financial plan for it, but a good corrective action plan?
Well, and the contract administration becomes really fun because now, right, we're working through the repair and we're doing this progressive. Okay, we taken care of building 1, and now we're going to get ready to start building 2. And when is number 3 going to be on the list? This is where some fun communication can come from the association and my team on the community management side of things of, hey, owners, guess what? Building 1 is done. Go check it out. Look at how cool this is going to be when it gets to your turn. Hey, by the way, I need everybody out of the building for a couple of hours so that we can take care of a bigger project. Those kind of things come up during that contract administration, and it's a big burden to try to oversee that as a homeowner board, as a community manager. The other favorite thing, Jim, I always love reading the notes from these meetings because now I have some information that I can take to the next email that comes in. Hey, Neil, this contractor says that I have to, yeah, that is what you need to do. And here's why you need to do it. So the contract administration, those meeting minutes and things that come out of those is you're meeting and you're talking and you're communicating what the plan is and what's next on kind of the recipe to get this taken care of. Those are sometimes a good time.
And one of the key parts of this for a lot of homeowners is we've been in those meetings where we just went through the financial planning for the repairs, and we're talking about the struggles of having to pay for this. And sometimes they're older properties, sometimes they're newer properties, and it depends on how they were built. But the person says, you know, who's going to make sure we're not in the same position in 10 years?
Right.
Who's going to make sure we're not here again in 15 years? You know, we want to pay for this once. And you've been in a meeting with me where I'll stand up and I've got my bright red shirt on and I say, hey, that's our responsibility. Our job is to make sure the contractor is doing their job. And if they're not doing their job, we need to do some corrective action on them. And it happens. You know, you go through this process, you have a great recipe, but you find things that they can be wrong. We got to get it fixed. We got to make sure that these homes are going to last once people have gone through this entire process.
Right. Oh my goodness. How many times have we had to have conversations with contractors and say, hey, the recipe calls for this. Why did you do that? I'm learning alongside you. I'm not a contractor. I chose to deal with pet waste and swimming pools and budgets. That's the world that I deal in. I don't know that you should use product A versus product B versus product C. That's something that my project management team, my J2, my building doctor is bringing to the table that I don't have an expertise in. But if you don't have somebody in your corner making sure that that happens, headache.
Yeah, I've got a good example, and actually, it was a property you and I were working on, and you may be aware of this, may not. But we were doing our initial kickoff meeting, our mock-up meeting, talking about all the products and the systems and the assemblies that we're going to be using. And so I was there for the mock-up meeting, putting siding together. So mock-up is building a wall that's not on the wall. So we're going to actually build a wall and we're going to practice. We're going to make sure that the contractor knows all of the products, knows how we want to see things go together. And we can document it. So if something comes up later, say, hey, here's the mock-up, here's the drawing, this is how these things are supposed to come together. And a person who turned into a good friend afterwards showed up and said, I went and got all the materials and here they are and I'm ready to go. Let's do this mock-up. And I said, would you mind handing me that material? So I took this particular product and I said, this isn't what we specified. You got something that came from the distributor that they put together in a bundle to provide to you. And we didn't specify because if you read this fine print on here, it's not compatible with the other products that we're using, which means one of the two are going to fail in belt. I said, I've been doing this for 25 years. I just learned something today. You've embarrassed me in front of my team, but I'm really glad that you caught that before we put this on the wall and we had some sort of a subsequent failure in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. This is an education opportunity. This is I understand that the anecdote is kind of silly, but you're not letting the wolf guard the chicken house because guess what? That contractor, if left to their own devices, is going to do what they're the most comfortable with, but that's not what the recipe is calling for. The recipe is calling for products that are going to work together to make sure that your building doesn't leak, fail, whatever, right? Those deck systems are wild with the things that they're required. And hey, by the way, the flashing needs to go all the way up here, not just to right here. And if you miss that, surprise, surprise, you will be back here in 5 years with a failing deck again. And the other really interesting part that I love about this, Jim, is in working with these contractors down the road on other projects, smaller scale, we're not maybe necessarily using a J2, and they're saying, oh, you know what? This is something I learned from J2. That's kind of cool that these contractors are understanding the value themselves of, I need a project manager. I need somebody here to make sure that my crews are all doing the right job. This is a different breed. Again, there's very few that are interested in doing the world of occupied remediation. Yeah, it's a job, and yeah, they're here to operate a business and all of those things, but they understand, I think, better than almost anybody, the value that this provides to these communities. They want to do it right.
And nobody's gonna catch everything. Nobody's gonna find everything, during this process. It's not to say that you need this in order to catch everything, or somebody is going to catch everything. You're doing a snapshot in time. So if you have a good recipe and you've had the good mock-ups and you're doing these things and you're going through a process and you're defining how that is gonna take place, usually means that you're gonna have a 99% project when you go through this CA phase. There's that 0.1. You're there 1 week and you're not there the next week, and something goes up and gets missed. Now we have to fall back on that contract language.
Yep.
That's why that's uniquely important.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know we could go through this for hours, so let's talk about a little summary. Put this together. The steps to a healthy building. So we talked about that initial inspection, that initial evaluation, visual inspection. That's, our team goes out and we're looking at what is there. Walls, windows, roofs, decks, below grade.
Yep.
You're just looking at the surface.
Right.
The invasive portion is when we peel the onion. We're going to pull a little bit of the materials away to see what's underneath. How is it performing under there? Everybody can see when paint gets a little UV sunburn, with what's happening behind them. Developing the plan, specs, and scope of repair. That necessary binder, I've got lots of 3-ring binders in my office. I don't usually just have a concrete wall behind me. There's a bunch of binders that have all these projects and their scopes of work. Working through the funding process. It's tough, but sometimes there are energy rebates and utility rebates. Replacing windows, oftentimes you're going to get an energy rebate. Same with roof insulation or wall insulation. So look for those little things. I had a project, another shameless plug. We had a project, 8 years ago now, and they were doing new siding and new windows, and they were going to hold off on doing the roofs, but they had a very large project in the building envelope. And because they had older style windows, we submitted for an energy rebate, and the local utility company reached out and said, okay, here's what you guys are going to qualify for. But if you replace the site lighting, so think parking lights, you've got lighting over parking. If you replace those with LED, then we can bump this up. So doing a real quick analysis, it cost them $10,000 to replace the street parking lights, and they got an extra $50,000 from the energy rebate. And after everything was said and done, they had to check for $134,000. Now it's a very small drop in the bucket on a $2.5 million project, but there's $134,000 that they just saved. They got from the local utility company. They can help offset that loan balance, and everybody has a more efficient home.
Yeah, and an unforeseen circumstance that happens with this, we try really hard to guide our communities at FCS through this process specifically, because energy companies are really interested in reducing power draw and getting those more energy efficient fixtures and lights and all those kind of things. LED lights don't fail like regular halogen bulbs do. And so those street lights, all of a sudden, I'm not having to go out and have somebody repair them every couple of years. And so my costs down the road also decrease. It's really an interesting way to kind of deal with this repair process of looking at it holistically and what is available there.
Yeah, your service and maintenance forecasting then are reduced.
Yep.
So you can offset that, and now we can put it into another bucket, and maybe we want to get the pool fixed sooner, or whatever the case may be. You can shift where those funds are going.
Yep.
Well, if you need an inspection, feel free to reach out. You can talk one-on-one to a building doctor. That's Jim without a beard. Jim has a beard currently, so maybe it's an older picture. If any of this sounds familiar, feel free to reach out. We'll set up free calls, 15 minutes. We can give you some specific advice, some directions to go. You can go to our website, j2consultants.com/consultant on call. And you can schedule right through there. Okay, quick summary. The difference between the best practice and the J2 standard of care. Yep, we know we've got to diagnose the damage. It's the level to which we take it to try and diagnose it, from a visual to an invasive and performance, short-term, immediate life safety, damage, and performance concerns. We're going to prescribe the treatment. So in case anyone hasn't caught on previously, building doctors, we're diagnosing damage, we're prescribing the treatment. So we're putting together the repair plan, and then we're treating the damage. That is the oversight. We've adopted those principles internally. We track projects through these things. We track all of our proposals through these 3 things as well. We have a proven method to guide the repair process. It's taken some time. It's a work in progress. We always are trying to strive for getting better. Nobody likes change. Everybody likes improvement. Need more knowledge on on managing your community? There's Neil. You can reach out to Neil s@hoaliving.com. Again, he's with FCS Community Management and Director of Support Operations.
Yeah. Happy to guide anybody through kind of what this looks like on the community management side. Board members, homeowners, anybody can reach out. Happy to guide them through this.
This is really all about, and I didn't want to correct you earlier when you talked about vendors, but this is really about being a good team and good stewards to our client. Healthy buildings are happy people. A good consultant, they're going to guide a client through the ups and the downs, diagnosing the issue, prescribing the repair plan, overseeing the treatment or repair to correct the known issues. It's a team. It takes a whole team to get through this process. And sometimes there are headaches. Even in the best laid plans, there are some headaches, but we've seen it. We've been there. We try and get through all of those, improvise, adapt, and overcome.
This podcast is part of J2's free live webinar, The Building Doctor Show. To attend the live show and ask your questions during the Q&A, visit www.j2consultants.com.